And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 9 of season 2, I want to remind you guys of a few things. I want to first off shout out Grind Clothing Co. They are our official merch sponsor, and you can click the link in our YouTube bio or in the description below and look at all the designs we have to offer on their website. Also, you'll see in today's episode, I'm wearing a Grind Clothing Co. jersey designed by the owner himself, who is a close friend by many means, but it might be something that may be to offer as a merch option for you guys one day. So stay tuned for that, and a lot of cool designs that you can buy on grindclothingco.com. I also want to make sure to remind you guys to tune into our Revved Up recaps. After every Detroit Pistons game, me and Ryan hop on Zoom and we talk about all the things that happened in each and every matchup. We talk about the statistics and the player of the game and that sort of thing. So make sure to turn on your post notifications on this YouTube channel. It is the bell on our YouTube profile, and that will send you the notifications every time we post, and you can stay in the know with every Detroit Pistons matchup through our Revved Up recaps content. Also, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, because if you want to stay in the know with Detroit Pistons content, you gotta be subscribed to Revved Up 906. And if you like our content, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, because that will shoot our content out into the YouTube algorithm so more eyes get on our podcast. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 9 of season 2. This week, we are going to talk trades once again. You guys love our trade content. And we are going to be breaking down 4 trades, and we are going to say yay or nay to these 4 trades. And to start off episode number 9 of season 2, let's talk about the first trade scenario, Ryan. This one's a good one. I'm excited to kind of hear what Ryan has to say. John Collins, Colin Sexton to the Detroit Pistons, and the Jazz would receive Joe Harris, Marvin Bagley, Killian Hayes, and a 26th draft pick. Ryan, your first thoughts on this trade between the Detroit Pistons and the Utah Jazz?
It's intriguing. It's definitely intriguing. To me, it's one in which there's no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
It depends what the Pistons are looking for. And I think this nails the head on the coffin, for me at least.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at John Collins and what type of player he is, most notably when he was in Atlanta playing with Trae Young, he was known as a defensive menace, somebody who's always going to hit the boards, someone who's flying all over the place. He can run rim to rim. He's one of those more versatile defenders in the league. And then offseason gets moved to Utah, and he's continued that. This season, he is averaging 14 points, 8 boards, an assist, a block, a steal, roughly 2 turnovers, 2 personal fouls, shooting 48% from the field, 40% from 3,
right,
and then 75% at the line. And to me, when you look at his style of play, and then you look at who we'd be giving up in Marvin Bagley, it's a clear and obvious upgrade. Marvin Bagley is inconsistent at being consistent. He's one of those guys where at times he can go off for 17 plus points,
right,
but not fill up the box score. Or there's other nights where he fills up the box score, but his point total is not anything spectacular. He's one of those more inconsistent bigs in the league. And I really think if we can find a consistent player to replace him, I think that'll make a bigger difference from our big man group in total. But then you look at Colin Sexton, who himself, when he was in Cleveland, what was he known for? He was known for defense. He has speed, which not a lot of guys on our team do have. The only notable guy is Jaden Ivey. He can start our transition offense, which is something that Killian Hayes does struggle with at time to time. Something that a lot of the guys on our team struggle with from time to time.
Yeah.
And he's a gritty player, and I really think John Collins and Colin Sexton coming in for Killian Hayes, Joe Harris, and Marvin Bagley, I think you take that trade, just because both players would be upgrades over, respectively, Marvin Bagley and Killian Hayes, but even more so than Joe Harris. And I don't think you pass up on an opportunity like that because they're still relatively young and their contracts aren't massive. And I think they'd fit in pretty good compared to the way things are going right now.
Well, and I think the biggest point about this trade is there's no dip off in the defensive department. It's really overall upgrade. I mean, we know Marvin Bagley struggles on the defensive end as far as protecting the paint. And then when he does hold his own in the paint, he's fouling. And then Killian Hayes is an absolute menace in the passing lane, solid one-on-one. But then Colin Sexton is going to be able to match that, if not a little bit better on the defensive end than Killian. So, and it's evident when watching the Detroit Pistons that they are one of the worst defensive teams in the league, if not the worst. So with a guy like Colin Sexton, I like Colin because I think that he's able to run an offense and facilitate, but then hold his own against the league's best when it comes to one-on-one defense and being a menace in the passing lanes. John Collins, I think it was a great point. Marvin Bagley, we know he's very good offensively, but inconsistent. John Collins can struggle with that same kind of thing as far as consistency, but John Collins is a little bit more of a veteran presence, and he is a little bit more of a flamethrower on the offensive end. When he catches wind of this great offensive ability and his shot starts falling early, he's going to be able to keep that rolling for the next 3 quarters. And that's kind of a presence that the Pistons need because they're just very inconsistent on the offensive end. As far as adding a guy like Colin Sexton to the Detroit Pistons, say this happens, what does that mean for Marcus Sasser, Monte Morris, Cade Cunningham, the other guards on our team? Do you see him coming off the bench? Do you see Cade going to the 2 slot? What world do you see the Pistons and the rotation-wise if you add a guy like Colin Sexton?
So it can either go 2 ways. But first option, he just replaces Killian Hayes in the starting lineup.
Right.
Takes that spot. Cade is still the point guard. Then Colin would be the 2. Or you see Colin coming off the bench. And I think him coming off the bench would be better than starting for us, just because that gives an option to have Jaden Ivey start for us, which we saw during this past week. When he starts, we're more successful on offense and on defense, and that's a good thing to have. It's a good thing to have a guy like Colin Sexton who could easily start for you to come off the bench. I mean, that's the same thing to be said about what's currently going on with Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey is clear and evidently good enough to start for any team in the league. But Monty, being he wants good, consistent players on any given night, on any rotation, he's been having Ivey come off in the second unit. But I think bringing in a guy like Colin can take Ivey up to the starting unit, come in, take that spot that Ivey had been playing in. And I don't think there's any difference in rotation-wise. You're just adding a more developed, better overall player versus Killian Hayes, which I love Killian Hayes. We both do. But Killian, as big of a jump as he's made this year so far, there's not a lot of time in which we can sit there and wait for him to hit where he's supposed to hit. But I really think Colin coming in, great second unit player, and that it's kind of like one of those guys that you want to have on your second unit, because you look back at former Pistons teams, like a Lindsey Hunter type player. Those guys easily could have started in the NBA.
Absolutely.
But they came off the bench with the second unit guys, and they thrived at it. And I think Colin Sexton, with the number of stops he's had between Cleveland to Utah to potentially Detroit now, he's he's accepted his role. In Cleveland, he initially started, then started coming off the bench with the second unit. Utah, he's been starting, but is getting used to coming off the bench with the second unit too. And I think him coming to Detroit, where there's not a lot of pressure on him, not very high expectations, I think he can come in and lift up and bring a lot of energy, more so than Killian Hayes and others do within our second unit. And I think him coming off the bench could be lethal.
Yeah, I think even Colin coming in early, maybe he doesn't start, but he makes himself into the rotation around like 4 minutes, 5 minutes into a game and kind of gets time with Cade. I see that duo going very well because what I like about Colin is he's not just a transition guy where he plays well in quick offensive possessions. He can kind of be there with Cade, working through an offense, running through plays. He's done that in all the teams he's played with Cleveland and Utah. And so what I like about him is he's like Cade, where he's dynamic offensively. Mm-hmm. He's not just great in the fast transition offense, but he can also work with setting up plays. And I think Cade sometimes feels like he has a heavy load with having to take care of scoring and passing, where Colin will come in and kind of lighten his load and kind of make Cade's job a little bit easier. I think that's what Cade is kind of struggling with right now. He gets his 25 points a game, 20 points a game, but he just can't have a well-rounded effort because he feels like he has to focus on these certain categories of being the superstar for the Pistons. And so I think if you give a guy like Cade, Colin Sexton, or even a John Collins in the pick and roll game and moving without the ball, it's going to make Cade's job that much easier. Ryan, I think you kind of mentioned it before, but are you yay or nay this trade?
I'm a big time yay.
Okay.
And it's strictly because John Collins would be a clear and evident upgrade over Marvin Bagley. And honestly, in certain possessions, would be an upgrade over Stu, would be an upgrade over Wiseman. And that's not because I'm sitting here going like, I don't like Isaiah Stewart. I do love Isaiah Stewart, but in certain game scenarios, you're going to want to go with a guy in John Collins who's a freak of an athlete.
Right.
In terms of the big department, has a little bit more length than Stu. In terms of height, Stu does beat him, but in terms of length, John Collins is there. And I think John Collins defensively would be a good key piece going forward. Whereas we have Marvin Bagley, who I think he's just one of the guys right now. And it's not like he's going to be here for forever. And if you can take an opportunity to potentially move a guy like Bagley, who hasn't been playing awful, for a guy in John Collins who can space the floor, is a great defender, an all-around player that could easily play alongside Jalen Duren, could easily play alongside Stu, I think you take that trade. And then Colin Sexton too, like as I mentioned earlier, he's a great defender. And I think him coming off the bench or even starting for us on any given night with his defensive presence, I think these two guys, you can't say no to that, even if they do end up moving on with 3 years later or 2 years later. I think you take this trade just because of what it could potentially bring you.
Yeah, I got to yay this trade too because, and like I said, I like Killian. I think it's getting to the point though where he's playing well enough, but we know his play doesn't lead to wins for the Pistons yet. So I think that means his value is at the highest it's going to be. It's only going to keep going down as far as trade market. So I think you do it soon this season. And Joe Harris, we're really not losing much. He hasn't been playing much. He gets 5 minutes a game here and there. I like his three-point shooting ability, but it hasn't really been there the last 10 games. And Marvin Bagley, I also think with Marvin that his trade market value is at the highest because he really is playing his best brand of basketball right now. With the Pistons, he's been playing the best in his career, I think, at least from watching from afar while he was in Sacramento. And now watching very closely, he's playing good basketball overall. He just disappears here and there. And I think with the opportunity at the Jazz, he's not going to lose out on minutes like what he's getting in Detroit. I think there's good opportunity there for him, and got playing alongside guys like Keontae George. I think it'd be a good opportunity for him. So I'm absolutely yaying this trade. The second trade scenario that we're going to talk about today, this one's interesting because I am a fan of this guy. PJ Washington, the Pistons would receive, and the Pistons would send to the Charlotte Hornets Marvin Bagley, Monte Morris, and 2 future second-round picks. My immediate thought on this trade is we're giving up a lot for PJ Washington. Ryan, your first thoughts?
My first thoughts on it is that you look at who we would be receiving in regards to PJ Washington. PJ is one of those guys who is a Marvin Bagley-esque player. He's on the more consistent side. He's a freak of an athlete himself. He would add maybe he kind of just reminds me a little bit too much of Marvin Bagley and a little too close of a comparison to Isaiah Stewart. Just because like PJ Washington really doesn't have a 3-point shot. He's just as good 3-point wise as Isaiah Stewart right now, if not slightly better. And so to me, it's kind of like the only way I really see this trade happening is if Stu ends up getting moved at the deadline, which is what's being reported right now. But then also, like, we haven't seen Monte Morris suit up for us yet. Who's to say that he isn't one of the missing keys to our puzzle in terms of winning? Weaver knew what he was going after in getting Monte Morris. When news broke of the Monte Morris trade versus the Joe Harris trade, everybody was talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
When the Joe Harris trade happened, everybody's like, oh, okay, we see that was a solid move. That might not go anywhere, and we're probably thinking it won't. But then you saw the trade of Monte Morris happen, and everybody in the NBA was going, wait a minute, that is actually a very good move for the Pistons. That could lead to a lot of success right there alone. And to me, it just, when you're giving up a guy who you haven't even seen play with your team yet, and then you're giving up 2 future second-round picks, it's hard to potentially go like, yeah, I would do that trade. Because PJ Washington this season's averaging 13 points, 5 boards, about 3 assists, a steal and a block, 2 turnovers, 2 fouls, shooting 42% from the field, 32% from 3, and then 73% at the line. When you look at his stats and then you compare it to Marvin Bagley, who's averaging 10 points, 5 boards, an assist, a block, 1 turnover, like 2-ish fouls, shooting 57% from the field, 20% from 3, and then 83% at the line. The 3-point shot compared to PJ Washington isn't there, but not by much.
Right.
But otherwise, their stats are almost identical. So to me, even though PJ Washington is younger than Bagley and could be considered an upgrade, I just think we're giving up a little too much to get PJ Washington. And I don't care that it's 2 second-round picks. The fact that you're giving up 2 on top of Marvin Bagley, who has been an consistent player, and then a guy in Monte Morris who we haven't even seen suited up for us. I just think, to me personally, it's not necessarily the smartest of moves.
Yeah, I think if you take away Monte Morris and you give Bagley and 2 second-round picks, a second-round pick, I'd probably accept it just because it's like, it is, in the NBA regular fan view, it is an upgrade.
Yep.
I do like the activity PJ Washington has as far as offensively and defensively as far as just like moving around, staying active. I like that he offers that. Marvin Bagley struggles with that at times. He can, I wouldn't say lazy, but just kind of lingers, isn't always moving with a purpose. So I do like that change for the Pistons because I think that needs to change in order for the Pistons to start winning. But yeah, right, when you look at the statistics, there's not a huge difference between Bagley and PJ. So for me, if you take away a couple of these pieces, I'm accepting it, but the way this is set up with Morris, 2 second-round picks, and Bagley for PJ, I'm going to say no. Ryan, what do you say?
Yeah, I'm saying no. When you look at their games prospectively, in the sense of what PJ Washington and his role is in Charlotte versus what Marvin Bagley's role is in Detroit, you break down just that alone. Bagley's probably seeing the floor a lot more than PJ Washington is, just because we suck. And Charlotte, you have LaMelo Ball. LaMelo is always going to want to have the ball in his hands. It's clear and evident. But also, when you have LaMelo Ball, who is as talented as he is,
Right.
it kind of makes sense to have the ball in his hands a little bit more. And PJ Washington, like his presence defensively is there, but offensively, Marvin Bagley's there with him. If Marvin Bagley was averaging 30 plus minutes a night and had a bigger role within this team, Marvin Bagley should be averaging close to 17 to 20 points a night. So I think Bagley versus Washington. Washington is a slight upgrade at defense, but on offense, it's not there. So, yeah, to me, it's a no.
Well, that will do it for the second scenario. That's a nay. Third scenario. I'm excited to hear Ryan's thoughts on this because the guy we're about to talk about trading to the Pistons is a guy that's not really talked about. He's a little underrated in today's NBA. Third scenario, the Pistons would receive Spurs forward Keldon Johnson, and the Pistons would send to the San Antonio Spurs Joe Harris, Killian Hayes, and a future second-round pick. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on this trade?
So first off, Keldon Johnson, as you mentioned, is a very underrated player in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
Taken 29th overall when he was selected, which a guy like him being 29th, you don't expect him to ever see the floor a whole lot. Case in point with Marcus Sasser, you're not expecting him out there, but he's out there and he's playing great. But Keldon Johnson, just like any San Antonio Spurs pick, historically speaking, they go after the guys that aren't huge names, depending on where they fall in the draft. And Keldon Johnson was one of those players. If they're not getting pick number one, they're taking sneaky good players that would fit their system, and that's Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson can consistently give you 20 points any given night. He doesn't need the ball in his hands 24/7 to be successful. He's a great defender. He can space the floor, and then he fills a need that we have on our team right now at the wing position. When you have Bojan Bogdanovic, yes, he is a wing, but Bojan, you can literally throw him at guard, you can throw him at the four.
Right.
There's no definitive spot for Bojan Bogdanovic within our offense. Then Asar Thompson, you can throw Asar 2 through 4. Same with Bojan. It depends if you're wanting to go small ball or if you're just wanting a full defensive lineup. But Keldon Johnson has a little bit more height than Asar Thompson and Bojan Bogdanovic. But then also, like, we haven't had a consistent player besides Bojan and besides Cade who can consistently go out there and give you 20 a night.
Right.
Last time we had that was Jeremy Grant. And then even Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin at times. But I think adding Keldon Johnson, who is a solid defender, alongside what he can give you on the offensive side of the ball, I think you take that trade just because we are thin at the wing, at the 3 position. And he's just one of those guys where if it's kind of like Asar. Asar doesn't need the ball in his hands to be effective. And if you can add a player like that, which is a little bit more of an upgrade, I think you take that trade. And what we'd be giving up compared to what we'd be receiving, we'd be winning this trade.
Yeah.
And that's not being mean. Joe Harris he hasn't been what we expected him to be for us. And then Killian Hayes, like I mentioned earlier, time is running out for him to really take that leap. Like, he's taken a big leap this year alone. And a lot of you will disagree with me on that. But I don't care because Killian Hayes, he is playing great basketball right now. He may not be going out there giving you 15 to 20 points every night, but he's at least going to be consistent in getting you points and then making great plays offensively with facilitating and whatnot. And he can fill the lanes. He's a great defender too. So I like this trade. I think there'd be more positives than negatives if we were to do this trade. And then also the Spurs on the receiving end, they're getting a guy in Killian Hayes where I think Pop because he's a great coach. He can definitely go out there and develop anyone.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he could be the missing link to Kylian developing. Plus, when you have a French player alongside Victor Wembanyama, who is French too, I think just European players in general, the Spurs love.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're adding a guy like Killian Hayes into that fold who can pass, Victor Wembanyama is missing a point guard. Because, no offense, I love Jeremy Sohan, but he is not a point guard.
Mm-mm.
So if you could add a good, solid point guard in Killian Hayes, I think the Spurs do this trade.
Yeah, and I think that a shortcoming of the Spurs roster is a point guard. And we know that Killian Hayes is a great passer in transition. I think I could see, even on the offensive end, whether you set up a play or it's in transition, I think he would be pretty lethal with Victor Wembanyama. So I think it's a good move for the Spurs. And then the Pistons are getting that consistent score that... What I like about Keldon is he doesn't demand the ball to score. And that's going to be crucial for the Pistons because with Cade Cunningham running the offense, being able to score at all three levels, whether it's in the paint, at the mid-range, or at the three-point line, Cade's not the best at setting up catch-and-shoot players. So a guy like Keldon can also score at all three levels, whether it's a contested shot at the rim or a catch-and-shoot three or an off-of-the-dribble or off-a-screen three. He can hit those buckets. That's what I like about Keldon because Cade isn't a system point guard. He's going to set you up in places that range from all three offensive levels. So Keldon is going to work well with that. And right now, the Pistons have to be focusing on who's going to play well with Cade. Yeah. Because Cade's one of the few shining lights in this Pistons organization right now. And also, Keldon isn't going to clog the paint offensively or defensively with Jalen Duren right now. We need to be able to space the floor, keep it spread out, and Keldon's going to help with that so that Jalen Duren can do his thing in the paint, whether it's rebounding or scoring or protecting the rim, and Cade can also continue to score any way he wants without a small forward getting in the way. Because right now I think Bojan at times messes with our offense. And I know that Bojan isn't in this trade, but I don't think they're going to fuss with each other too much. So overall, when talking about this trade, Keldon Johnson for Joe Harris and Killian Hayes, I'm taking the trade.
Yeah.
I like Keldon Johnson. I think he would add a dynamic to the Pistons that we don't really have offensively, and he's not horrible on defense. He's not known for defense, but he's a smart player, high IQ. He knows how to stay in front of guys and play solid defense. I like that. And so, Ryan, you're taking this trade?
Yeah, I'm definitely taking this trade. I think it's a win-win for both sides.
Yeah.
Just because we'd be getting a need and the Spurs would be getting a need. And realistically, you may be going, why would the Spurs do this trade when it's Keldon Johnson, who is clearly one of their best players? It's easy to answer this because they're in a rebuild. Well, I was going to say two, but we're in a restore. But realistically, it's a rebuild.
Right.
We're both rebuilding right now. And when they can add a top draft choice in Killian Hayes, who is still extremely young, and you have a great first ballot Hall of Fame head coach in Greg Popovich, I think you take this opportunity to really explore what Killian Hayes could bring to their team. And then, for us, I think it's a win-win. You add a good, solid player that can give you 20 points, doesn't need the ball in his hands to be effective. And so, yeah, I would take this trade.
The fourth and final trade scenario that we are going to yay or nay that has been being talked about in the NBA community within the GMs, the Pistons would receive Jeremy Grant, Matisse Thybulle, and then the Pistons would trade away to the Trailblazers Joe Harris, Alec Burks, Marvin Bagley, and 3 future second-round picks. We know what Jeremy Grant has to offer for the Detroit Pistons. Matisse Thybulle, absolute centerpiece on the defensive end for the 49ers, the 76ers, and now the Portland Trailblazers. Pistons struggle defensively. He could add a dynamic to the Pistons defense that we haven't had since Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Ryan, your first thoughts on this trade between the Pistons and the Portland Trail Blazers?
Well, like you said, we know what Jeremy Grant is going to give to us. We know what he's going to bring to us on a nightly basis. And that could be a good thing. Just because when you look at his style of play, right now he's averaging 23 points, 4 boards, 3 assists, a steal, a block, 2 turnovers, 2 fouls, 45% from the field, 40% from 3, and then 83% at the line. We know what he's going to give us, which is a good thing. When you look at what we have right now, just like Keldon Johnson, he's one of those guys that can go out there and consistently give you a bucket or 2. And I think just from the comfort level side of things, I think it would be easier to bring in a guy you know versus a guy you don't know. And to me, we haven't seen what a guy in Jeremy Grant could be alongside a healthy Cade and or Bojan Bogdanovic, not to mention Jalen Duren, and then Jaden Ivey. Jeremy Grant has only played with a select few players on our team, and it's pretty much just Cade Cunningham. But if you add a guy like Jeremy Grant, who the last great team he was on was the Nuggets, and then he leaves, and the Nuggets won a championship last year. He was a key piece in one of their earlier runs with the Nuggets. And then with us, we didn't really have a team that was capable of winning, but then not just capable of winning, we were in a rebuild phase then too. So I think if you add a guy in Jeremy Grant back to us with the revamped roster we have right now, I think it could easily be a recipe for success. And then Matisse, I love Matisse. I've always loved him ever since he came into the league. He's one of those guys that he doesn't need to be out there dropping 10, 20 points a night. He doesn't need to be out there doing everything. You know what he brings to you. He brings defense, and he's a very gritty player. And that is literally Detroit written all over him.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you can add a guy in him who right now, he's averaging 6-ish points a game, but that's not what Portland's using him as. They're using him as a defender, which is his bread and butter. But I will say, I'll throw this out. He is shooting 45% from the field, above 40% at 3, and then above 75% at the line. So not only are you adding a great defender, but you're adding a good quality shooter too.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact we would be losing a 3-point shot in Joe Harris and then even Alec Burks, I think when you look at it, Matisse can fill a little bit of that role. And we're still holding on to Bojan. Jeremy Grant can hit the 3.
Mm-hmm.
So realistically, I don't see this as a big negative. But it's more of like, does Portland do this trade? Because to them, I think they love what they have in Jeremy Grant, but I don't think they're wanting to pay him. And that was the situation we were in from the get-go. And I don't know if they want to be in that situation too because of how consistently good Jeremy Grant has been for them. Because they're borderline rebuilding / contending. But I do believe from who they'd be receiving in Alec Burks alone, I think they would be very excited for that.
Yeah, and with this trade, the Pistons are basically going all in on the defensive end because we know Jeremy, yes, is an absolute flamethrower from the mid-range and in the paint on the offensive end. But his length and athletic ability makes him an absolute asset on the defensive side. So, and I do think it's necessary that we need help on the defensive end. I think it's a necessary thing that we need to make moves for. And he's going to make up for the scoring that we lose with Alec Burks. Because he is, like, especially Jeremy on the Pistons, he was very Alec Burke-esque. Yep. Like, he would just hit shots that you're like, so consistently that you were like, what is he doing shooting that? And he would knock him down. And that's the way Alec Burks is. You're like, oh, no, don't shoot that. And then he drills it. You're like, what the heck? So I do like that dynamic that Jeremy brings. It's the same kind of feel that Alec Burks brings. The problem is when you look at Matisse and what he's averaging, the 6 points, that makes me a little weary because, on any given night he could give you 14, but rather than not, he's gonna be giving you that 6%. That 6 points per game rather. I do like the high percentage. He's a high IQ player. He's not going to be putting up shots that he takes what the defense gives him.
Yep.
I guess is what I'm saying. He's not going to be a guy that you cringe at every night, like an Isaiah Livers, sometimes Alec Burks, sometimes Marcus. He puts up some wild shots sometimes. But so that's what I do like with the Pistons. Right now, the Pistons have those inconsistent guys, and what you're bringing in with a Matisse Thybulle is one of those high IQ players that I believe would be able to hang with Cade. We know he's very high IQ when it comes to basketball. So I like the dynamic that the Pistons would be adding. The Pistons really aren't giving up anything too crazy. Marvin Bagley, it hurts to see him go without getting a big. Jeremy Grant's long, tall, but he's not really like a Marvin Bagley-esque player like a PJ Washington would be. So I have mixed feelings on this trade. Overall, I'm yaying this trade, I think I'm yaying it because I like Matisse. Like you said, I've always been a fan of him too. Jeremy Grant, I think he did right by the Pistons. He always put in a top-notch effort, even when they were losing lots and lots of games. He was always trying to be a help. And I also would love to see Jeremy and Bojan get some minutes together and see what that looks like. Because I think when you think about it initially, you're like, I don't know. But then I'm thinking about it, I'm like, it could work.
Yeah.
Like it could, having that much length and Jeremy kind of helping out on the rebounds and defensive end that Bojan struggles with, I could see it possibly mixing well. It would just depend on how they pass the ball between each other on the offensive end. But I could definitely see Jeremy or Bojan at the 4 and one at the 3. Or you go tall ball and one at the 2 and one at the 3. It would be kind of interesting to see what that would look like. And I kind of want to see a world where Jeremy and Bojan share the court together.
Yeah, not only that though, but I want to see Jeremy Grant, as much as we did complain about him early on with Cade and just the fact that it seemed like Jeremy wanted to be the guy when he wasn't the guy.
I forgot about that.
But I do believe coming back to Detroit, he gets a fresh start, can continue where he left off in his production. He wanted to be in Detroit the entire time. He didn't even want to be moved originally. So you bring in a guy who wants to be there, who has consistently worked his tail off night in, night out for you. And then you know what he's going to bring you every single night out there. And then for me, when you look at a potential starting lineup, I mean, obviously you have Cade at the 1. But then it's like, do you throw Asar off the bench, or do you have Jaden Ivey coming off the bench? To me, in that situation, you're going to start Asar. But just even imagine a lineup of Cade at the 1, Ivey at the 2, Bojan at the 3, Jeremy Grant at the 4, and then Dern at the 5. Just the dynamic of having a guy in Jeremy Grant who can consistently give you a bucket, Bojan who can consistently give you a bucket, Cade Cunningham who can consistently give you a bucket, Jaden Ivey who can consistently give you a bucket, Jalen Dern who can consistently give you a bucket. Like that starting lineup, now it has yet to be seen. This is a big what if. But to me, when you look at that, who are you game planning for if you're the opposing team coming in?
Yeah.
Because
what do you do?
You have Jeremy, who, like I said, he's averaging 23 points right now. Cade just dropped 43 the other night, career high. And then Ivy at times can be very explosive. But then you throw Asar into that mix too. Asar could easily thrive within a lineup like that. If he's starting at the 2, let's say that. You don't need him to be a big scoring load like he has been needing to be. Because you have Jeremy Grant who can get you the 20. You have Bojan who can score the ball. Cade who can score the ball. And then Dern who can score the ball.
Right.
I think this is Out of any of these trade offers, I really do believe this one might be the best one, just because of what you know you'd be getting in Jeremy Grant. He's a comfort guy. You know what you're going to get out of him.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, like, imagine trying to defend a team in which you have that much firepower.
Right.
And then also, like, in a world where you're not giving up Bojan Bogdanovic to get a guy in Jeremy Grant, it's not like you're just getting Jeremy Grant and that's it. You're getting a good defender in Matisse Thybulle, which we desperately need. So I think this, fills out Portland's roster a little bit more than what it is now. And realistically, they love having DeAndre Ayton in the game more so than Jeremy Grant, because Ayton is just one of those guys who's bigger, and you're wanting to have
Beast.
You're wanting him to get more playing time, because I'm sorry, Jeremy Grant, I love you. I want you in Detroit again if it comes down to this. But DeAndre Ayton is the guy. He is now the guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is truthfully a win-win for both teams, more so than us than them. But going into this episode, I'm sitting there going, would I really do this trade? And part of me says no, just because of what we'd be giving up in Alec Burks. But then now talking about it, I have to go yes, just because I do see a lot more positives than negatives.
Well, and the reality of Alec Burks is he's having a down year from last year. You know, he's been struggling, but you never know, with the different personnel in Portland, maybe he would do well. And what I like about Matisse Thybulle is we would see him coming off the bench, and we have a lot of offensive great players off the bench. We got Marcus Sasser, we got Killian Hayes if he's not traded away in this trade. We got James Wiseman, who struggles defensively but solid offensively, and Monte Morris. So I think Matisse would add a defensive dynamic to this second rotation that we don't have right now, and I think that would be very powerful for the Detroit Pistons. That will do it for episode number 9 of season 2. We talked about 4 trade scenarios that the Pistons have been maybe having a close eye on, and we yay or nay them. So make sure to comment below what your guys' thoughts on these trades. If you see some of these coming, or make sure to comment below if you have a trade idea that we didn't mention in today's episode. We would love to know your guys' thoughts. Make sure to like and subscribe, turn on your post notifications, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.